Number 16. James Matt French. In March 2023, a police officer was patrolling the streets in Oklahoma City at 2 a.m. when he noticed an SUV speeding and swerving between lanes. He followed the car as it turned into a subdivision without a turn signal and conducted a traffic stop as it slowly pulled into a driveway. Behind the wheel was an off-duty police captain named James Matt French, who was a 32-year veteran of the force. The officer on duty observed a distinct smell of alcohol as he spoke with French and noticed that the captain's eyes were glassy and his speech was very slurred. In a conversation that was caught on body cam footage, French identified himself and said he was on his way home after having a few beers at a poker game. He asked the arresting officer to turn his body camera off multiple times, but the officer refused and said he was not going to give the man any special treatment. French performed poorly on all of the field sobriety tests and was taken into custody on suspicion of DUI. He was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of his criminal case and an internal investigation. Oklahoma City Police Chief Wade Gawley declined to go into detail about why he thought French requested that the officer turn his body camera off, but praised the cop's professionalism in handling the situation. The case is ongoing, so we'll have to wait for the outcome. Number 15. Stephen Jones. 34-year-old father of two, Stephen Jones, was working as a police sergeant in northern Wales when he decided to start cheating on his wife, 37-year-old Madeline Jones, with a local barmaid back in 1992. He completely lost interest in his marriage during the excitement of the affair, but he wasn't interested in the potential costs of a divorce and believed that leaving Madeline would ruin his chances for a promotion at work. So, to avoid this, late one night in early 1993, Jones lured his wife into their garage by pretending her brother had a heart attack. He then killed her with a single blow to the head using his police baton and put a garbage bag over her face to stop blood from getting everywhere. Jones loaded his wife's dead body into her car, drove it down an embankment, and right into a tree. He then placed the corpse in a nearby stream to make it look like Madeline had flown through the windshield in a car accident. Someone quickly saw the car and called the police. It happened so fast that Jones had no time to get rid of the evidence at his house before his colleagues came by to comfort him. By then, investigators at the scene were already finding suspicious signs that the crash was staged. Jones, who stood over a foot taller than his wife, forgot to pull the seat back up before placing Madeline behind the wheel. She was way too short to have been driving the car with the seat set so far back. Even before an autopsy was performed, forensic detectives noticed that Madeline's head injuries were inconsistent with those of a typical car accident. And there was also no glass in her hair, making it highly doubtful that she went through the windshield. In the trunk of Jones's car, police found his police helmet, which he wore to prevent injury when he crashed Madeline's car. They also found the bloody baton that he had used to kill her. He had taken out multiple life insurance policies on his wife and stood to gain tens of thousands of dollars from her death. It may not sound like much in today's standards, but it was a substantial amount of money 30 years ago. Luckily, he was arrested and charged with Madeline's murder before he could cash it all in. During his trial, Jones claimed Madeline died after simply falling and hitting her head. He said he panicked and staged the accident out of fear that he would be blamed for her death. Prosecutors, on the other hand, accused Jones of a cold and calculated murder, saying that he used his police experience to his advantage in his cover-up attempt. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 14. Nicholas Tartaglione. In 2008, former law enforcement officer Nicholas Tartaglione retired from the Briarcliff Manor Police Department in New York after suffering an injury. He spent the next few years living on a quiet ranch in Otisville, about 70 miles north of New York City. During that time, he secretly started running a drug ring with the help of Joseph Biggs, a bodybuilder who worked for Tartaglione as an enforcer, and Gerard Benderoth, a retired NYPD officer and bodybuilder who also added muscle to the operation. In 2015, Tartaglione paid a landscaper named Martin Luna to buy cocaine in Mexico and sell it in Florida. The drugs were sold as promised, the customers were apparently happy, and Tartaglione quickly sent Luna back to Mexico with $200,000 for another shipment of the product. This time, Luna returned to New York empty-handed, claiming that the dealers he paid ran off with the money and never actually gave him the drugs. One day in April 2016, Tartaglione, Benderoth, and Biggs lured Luna to a bar to discuss the potential job opportunity. Luna brought along some of his nephews, Miguel Luna and Urbano Santiago, and a family friend named Hector Gutierrez. As soon as the men entered the bar, they were ordered to get on the floor at gunpoint and were bound with duct tape. Tartaglione tortured Luna and strangled him to death with a zip tie while forcing his nephews to watch. He then loaded the body into his truck and drove to his property while his associates transported the 3 other captives. Santiago, Gutierrez, and Miguel were ordered to their knees, shot dead and buried at the remote wooded site. While the murder of Martin Luna was planned, the other 3 men were just collateral damage. They were not involved in the drug activities and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. 8 months later, the FBI charged Tartaglione with 17 counts, including murder, kidnapping, and a handful of drug and gun charges. He famously shared a cell with Jeffrey Epstein, who accused Tartaglione of assault. Agents pulled Benderoth over in 2017, but he took his own life before they could apprehend him. Biggs was arrested only a few months later. Facing the same charges as Tartaglione and a potential life sentence, Biggs decided to cooperate in hopes of possibly seeing freedom again in his lifetime. Because Tartaglione maintained his innocence and Benderoth was dead, authorities had no choice but to go by Biggs' version of events. He promised to be truthful under the condition that he would face a life sentence if caught in a single lie. Biggs admitted to shooting one of the victims and pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including murder. He is currently awaiting sentencing and could still face life in prison despite his cooperation. Tartaglione's lawyers argued that their client was set up by his associates as a fall guy and that he was not involved in the murders. Unswayed by the defense's claims, a jury convicted him on every count. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty though, which means he'll likely face life behind bars when sentenced in October 2023. Number 13. Andre Reddit. After being handed divorce papers in January 2023, a 27-year-old police officer from St. Gabriel, Louisiana named Andre Reddit began stalking his estranged wife. On March 1st, someone entered the woman's home and fired several rounds at an overnight visitor, 26-year-old National Guardsman Dylan Martin. The victim died thanks to his injuries. Shortly after the fatal shooting, Reddit showed up at a nearby hospital with a stab wound authorities believe he sustained during the attack. He was placed on administrative leave and charged with second-degree murder, stalking, and obstruction of justice in connection to both the shooting and a previous incident in which he allegedly stalked his ex-lover. According to police, Reddit and his estranged wife had temporary restraining orders against one another at the time of the shooting. Shortly afterwards, his wife filed for a permanent restraining order and chose to move forward with charges from prior incidents with Reddit. Number 12. Virginia cops face murder charges. In early March 2023, officers with the Henrico County Police Department in Virginia responded to a call from a civilian about their neighbor. After discussing the matter with the man, 28-year-old Irvo Noel Otieno, officers concluded that the call was mental health related instead of criminal and left without making any arrests. The next morning, police responded to another call about a suspected burglary involving Otieno. This time, they placed him under an emergency custody order, which is used when someone seems to be having a mental health crisis, and took him to a hospital. While there, Otieno allegedly became assaultive toward the officers and was taken to a local jail, booked on charges of assaulting an officer, disorderly conduct, and vandalism. 3 days later, he was transferred to a state hospital. During the intake process, multiple officers and hospital employees had to pin Otieno to the floor, despite him being shackled and handcuffed. Footage of the incident revealed that Otieno was restrained for about 20 minutes, spending much of it face down on the floor. At some point, staff members realized that Otieno had actually gone limp. They tried to resuscitate him, but he never regained consciousness and ultimately passed away. An autopsy concluded that Otieno had been asphyxiated. 7 deputies, Randy Boyer, Dwayne Bramble, Jermaine Branch, Bradley Diss, Tabitha Levere, Brandon Rogers, and K.L. Sanders, are now facing second-degree murder charges for what the prosecution has described as a smothering death. 3 hospital workers were also charged in connection to the incident. Lawyers for Otieno's family have described the tragedy as yet another case of law enforcement excessively restraining someone in mental distress who was subjected to malicious treatment when he really needed compassion and medical help. The case is ongoing, but what are your thoughts? Number 11. Eric Bennett. In January 2023, law enforcement in Monmouth County, New Jersey, arrested 46-year-old Seabright officer Eric A. Bennett for allegedly stalking his recent ex-girlfriend. The couple had broken up just 2 months earlier after dating for a short time. According to a criminal complaint, Bennett showed up uninvited at the woman's home days later and threatened to hurt her. The alleged victim installed security cameras at her home and blocked Bennett from contacting her after this. But about a month later, she started to get threatening messages on social media from an unknown user. A few days after that, someone slashed all her tires, keyed the side of her car, ripped a flagpole off her house, and tore down her security cameras. Investigators were able to put Bennett near the woman's house at the time of the vandalism, and they also discovered that he had used police computers to research the woman and people in her life over 30 times. During one incident, he allegedly threatened to harm the victim with a knife. When questioned by his supervisors, Bennett admitted to taking down her security cameras so he wouldn't be seen slashing her tires. Bennett was hit with a list of charges, including pattern of official misconduct, 2 counts of official misconduct, 2 counts of computer theft, criminal mischief, making terroristic threats, cyber harassment, hindering apprehension, identity theft, and stalking. He was suspended from the force without pay and held in jail pending the next step in his case. Number 10. Wayne Couzens. 33-year-old Sarah Everard was walking home from a friend's house in London one night back in 2021 when Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Couzens falsely arrested her for violating COVID-19 regulations. But instead of taking Sarah to the police station like she expected, Couzens drove her straight to the remote outskirts of Dover, where he proceeded to brutally assault and strangle her to death with his police belt. He then set her body on fire and fled the scene. After being implicated in the crime based on surveillance footage, Couzens claimed that an Eastern European gang forced him to commit the crime. As he awaited trial for Sarah's murder, his arrest triggered widespread outrage toward the Metropolitan Police for missing multiple warning signs that many believe could have prevented the deadly assault from ever taking place. Included among these red flags were multiple indecent exposure incidents stemming as far back as 2015, 2 of which happened at fast food drive-thrus only days before Sarah's murder. Another complaint accused Couzens of stepping in front of a woman on her bike in a wooded area, buck naked, in 2020, when he was supposed to be working from home at the time. In 2018, Couzens apparently assaulted a drag performer, and on another occasion a prostitute stormed into the police station, demanding payment from him. After the murder, Couzens' wife was left reeling over her failure to spot warning signs that her husband was capable of unspeakable violence. At the end of the day, though, she was just one of several people who gave him the benefit of the doubt. Couzens pleaded guilty to Sarah's murder and was handed a life sentence, which means he will stay behind bars until his dying day. Number 9. Bobby Cutts Jr. 26-year-old Jessie Davis was almost 9 months pregnant when she suddenly vanished back in 2008. Her mother found her son home alone and noticed the smell of bleach, instantly making her fear the worst. While Jessie's son was too young to say exactly what happened, he made some disturbing statements that suggested she had met her end with foul play. The Canton Police Department repeatedly told the media that it did not consider Jessie's boyfriend and the father of her children, Officer Bobby Cutts Jr., a suspect in the case at all. But they turned out to be wrong, and answers soon came as the local sheriff's department and the FBI looked into the case. During the time Jessie was gone, Cutts was already active on a dating site. He also avoided the press and only gave one interview, during which he wept and denied any involvement. 9 days after the young woman disappeared, Katz finally confessed and led police to her body. He was arrested for murder and aggravated murder the same day. During his trial, Katz took the stand in his own defense and claimed he accidentally killed Jessie by elbowing her in the throat during an argument after she bit his finger, causing her to fall backwards and die from injuries. He supposedly got scared afterwards, so he hid her body in the woods. The prosecution accused Katz of strangling Jessie to death in cold blood. Jessie's family echoed similar sentiments. In an impact statement, the slain woman's sister, Whitney Davis, accused Katz of throwing away her sister simply because she became an inconvenience to him. Whitney said that Katz was only sorry he got caught and that he lacked genuine remorse for what he did. A jury convicted Katz of both murder charges, which made him eligible for the death penalty in Ohio. He pleaded with the court to spare his life and was instead sentenced to 57 years to life in prison. Number 8. Blair Christopher Hall. In 2007, while renovating the bathroom at their California home, retired San Bernardino narcotics detective Blair Christopher Hall and his wife Christy Lynn were hanging out in their outdoor jacuzzi. After hearing a scream from the couple's backyard one day, neighbor Lindsay K. Patterson looked over a wall separating the properties. She saw Christy Lynn face down in her bathing suit and Hall perched over her with one hand holding her head and another on her back. Assuming they were just being intimate, Patterson quickly looked away, but she was unable to shake the suspicion that something wasn't right, so she looked one more time and saw Hall relaxing in the hot tub with Christy nowhere in sight. A little while later, Hall rushed his wife to the emergency room, claiming that he found her motionless in the jacuzzi after coming back from using the bathroom. He said he tried to perform CPR before bringing Christy to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. After noticing multiple injuries on Christy's body, including cuts, abrasions, and bruises, as well as hemorrhaging in the eyes and mouth, County Medical Examiner Dr. Mark Scott McCormick concluded that the victim had been forcefully drowned. Hall was then charged with first-degree murder. He denied killing his wife and received unwavering support from their 3 children during the case. Prosecutors dismissed his claims of innocence, though, and pointed toward an $800,000 life insurance policy as a possible motive. As the trial unfolded, media reports revealed that Hall's police record was less than stellar. After working as an officer for 12 years and retiring in 1994 due to a gunshot wound, he became the police chief of 2 Idaho towns. He was let go after being accused and convicted of a felony charge for embezzling $19,000 from a drug task fund, but managed to avoid prison time. The first trial for Christie's murder ended in a hung jury, but Hall's second trial concluded with a guilty verdict and a sentence of 25 years to life in prison for the killer. Number 7. Amber Geiger. Dallas police officer Amber Geiger just finished up her shift and was going home on the night of September 6, 2018, when she lost track of which floor of her apartment building she was on. She accidentally entered the wrong unit, even though the door was clearly labeled with a number that should have told her she was on the 3rd floor instead of the 4th. There was also a bright red doormat that looked nothing like hers, but she somehow didn't notice any of these things, and she opened the door to see an African-American man she didn't recognize sitting on his own sofa eating ice cream. He was unarmed and not threatening in any way, yet Geiger still pulled out her service weapon and fired at him twice, hitting him in the chest. Now that the damage was done, Geiger suddenly recognized her mistake and called 911. It was unfortunately too late to save 26-year-old Botham Jean, who died from his injuries. Geiger was initially arrested for manslaughter, but the charge was upgraded to murder. In the meantime, protests broke out across the U.S. over the numbers of unarmed black men that were dying by the hands of police. Geiger argued that she believed she was at her apartment and simply mistook Jean for an intruder. Prosecutors accused her of missing multiple signs that she was in the wrong place, since she was distracted by flirtatious text messages she was exchanging with her married police partner, Martin Rivera. When the shooting happened, the pair were caught up in a year-long affair and were in the middle of planning a rendezvous for later that night. The defense argued that Geiger wasn't distracted by the steamy messages, but that she was simply operating on autopilot and acting out of habit. Even if this were the case, the court did not believe that her lack of awareness gave her a good enough reason to open fire. Geiger was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her sentence is scheduled to run until 2029, but she could be paroled by 2024. Number 6. Kwaku Riley Agyapong. Known to the Ranlow, North Carolina community as Officer Riley, Kwaku Riley Agyapong responded to a domestic violence complaint at 33-year-old Juan Knightley Avalo's home in November 2022. Avalo was accused of assaulting and threatening his wife, who Agyapong stayed in touch with after responding to the call. When Avalo discovered Officer Riley's number in his wife's phone, the men decided to speak with one another. According to reports, Agyapong challenged Avalo to meet up and fight him at a gas station. Instead, he showed up at Avalo's house at 2 a.m. on New Year's Day, and the men fought it out there. During the altercation, Avalo stabbed the off-duty police officer who, in response, allegedly pulled a gun and pulled the trigger 5 times, shooting and killing Avalo in the head. Investigators believe that Avalo had dropped the knife by this point and was trying to escape when he was killed. He was reportedly shot from at least 75 feet away, suggesting that he posed no immediate threat to Agyapong. The Ranlow Police Department quickly turned the investigation over to state authorities. Based on the evidence, they charged Agyapong with first-degree murder. 10 days later, Agyapong was fired. He reportedly refused to sign the termination notice delivered to him at the jail, where he's currently being held without bond. Agyapong was only on the Ranlow force for a little over 4 months, and it was already his second time leaving a law enforcement job. For just over 2 years, starting in October 2019, Agyapong worked for the nearby Gastonia Police Department. A school district spokesperson told the Gazette that he was accused of stopping a school bus from finishing its route while questioning the driver about a student's behavior. The details surrounding the incidents are vague, and a charge against Agyapong was not pursued. He formally separated from the Gastonia Police Department in April 2022 and was sworn in as a Ranlow officer a few months later. Number 5. Eric Bergen. 28-year-old Cynthia Kempf was managing a Safeway store in California's Bay Area back in 1998 when 4 men abducted her as part of a plot to get into the business's safe. After seeing a police cruiser drive through the store's parking lot, the kidnappers aborted their plan and instead drove Cynthia to a secluded field. They put a bag over her head, bound her wrists, and fatally shot her in the back as she helplessly laid on the ground. Investigators eventually traced the crime to 28-year-old Eric Bergen, a former officer who quit the force 3 months after Cynthia's murder while being investigated for police brutality. Bergen admitted to committing about a dozen unrelated robberies over a 5-month period after leaving his job, but a murder charge for killing Cynthia was dropped thanks to a lack of evidence. He went to prison for the robberies and was set to be released in 1994 when prosecutors finally managed to find enough evidence to indict him for Cynthia's murder. They did this by promising immunity to Mario Salguero, Bergen's co-conspirator in the robberies, who was also suspected of being involved in Cynthia's death. When he agreed to work with them, Salguero was serving a 17-year sentence for the robberies. As promised, he incurred no further punishment for the botched Safeway incident. Bergen's brother Carl also struck a deal with prosecutors and testified in exchange for a 10-year sentence, and a fourth conspirator, former Pittsburgh Police Sergeant George Elzey, was given 12 years. In court, Eric argued that he deserved leniency since everyone else involved in the crime received a lighter sentence. Meanwhile, Cynthia's family implored the court to impose a full life term. The judge overseeing the case acknowledged that the justice system can be unfair at times. In Eric's case, this meant giving 2 men a slap on the wrist and allowing another to get away with the crime entirely for the sake of securing a conviction solely against him. But that's unfortunately the way things go sometimes, and while the judge wasn't thrilled about how things turned out for Eric's accomplices, he saw no reason not to impose what he felt was a fair sentence against Eric. Bergen was handed 2 life terms, with the possibility of parole starting in 2017. His parole bids have been denied so far, and he remains locked up at San Quentin State Prison. Number 4. Josh Griffin. 26-year-old cocktail waitress Kim Medlin disappeared one day in 1997 while driving home from her job at a strip club in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her Jeep was found on the side of the road about 2 hours after her shift finished up. Kim's purse and money were inside the vehicle, but she was nowhere in sight, and her driver's license was also strangely missing. The young woman's body was found the next day in a secluded industrial area about 1.5 miles from her car. An autopsy revealed that Kim had been beaten, strangled, and stomped on, leaving her with multiple fractures and even a broken neck. There was also evidence that her wrists had been tied up, although the ligature had been removed altogether. Investigators quickly ruled out robbery as a possible motive. They also cleared Kim's husband, Bridger, of any involvement, even though a Monroe police officer claimed to see Bridger's truck in the area around the time of the victim's death. In fact, Bridger proved to be a valuable help to law enforcement by offering insights about his wife's personality and habits. He said Kim would have never pulled over for anyone except a cop, which could explain why her driver's license was missing and her Jeep was running with the driver's side window rolled down. A witness soon came forward and said they had seen a Monroe police officer pulling Kim over before she went missing. They were able to pick the vehicle out of a lineup, and shoe prints on Kim's clothing all led to the same suspect, a 23-year-old off-duty officer named Josh Griffin. His patrol vehicle was suspiciously clean, and his shoes were absent during an initial search of his house. Just 2 weeks before Kim's murder, someone had aggressively followed her on her way home from work. She reported the road rage incident to police, and the officers on duty urged their colleagues to keep an eye out for Kim's car during the morning to ensure that she was safe while driving home alone from her job. Prosecutors theorized that Griffin overheard the broadcast and decided to take an inappropriate interest in Kim. They accused him of pulling the victim over and killing her when she rejected his advances. Griffin denied any involvement in her murder, but was still charged with the crime. He soon changed his story and claimed that some drug dealers he owed money to for steroids offered to let him repay his debt by pulling Kim over and giving her over to them. Yet he was unable to provide any information about these supposed dealers, including basic descriptions of what they looked like. He also accused a fellow officer of being involved, but the co-worker passed a polygraph and was cleared. Meanwhile, several women came forward, accusing Griffin of different harassment incidents. The disgraced former cop was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He maintained his innocence until 3 years later, in 2001, when he finally confessed to the crime. According to a transcript of the confession, the murder played out as the injuries on Kim's body suggested. Afterward, Griffin tossed his shoes into a trash can, then cut up Kim's license and smashed a flashlight he beat her with, flushing the pieces down the toilet. Number 3. Patrick Ferguson. In early 2021, 30-year-old Robert Lee Howard Jr.'s girlfriend reported him missing in Memphis, Tennessee. The woman told police that she found Howard's phone by tracking its location, but Howard was nowhere to be found. Suspicion quickly fell on 29-year-old Patrick Ferguson, an officer with the Memphis Police Department whose ex-girlfriend had recently left him for Howard. Ferguson allegedly admitted to kidnapping Howard at gunpoint while on duty and forcing the victim into the back of his squad car, where he proceeded to fatally shoot Howard. According to police, part of the abduction was captured on camera. The Scorned cop also said he got rid of the body in one place, but moved it to a second location with help from a close friend. 4 days after Howard disappeared, his body was recovered. Ferguson was instantly fired from his job and faces a laundry list of charges, including first-degree murder in perpetration of aggravated kidnapping, abuse of a corpse, and fabricating and tampering with evidence. He pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond. The case appears to be ongoing amid over a dozen delays in Ferguson's scheduled court hearings. Authorities also charged 28-year-old Joshua Rogers, who allegedly helped Ferguson move Howard's body, with accessory, abuse of a corpse, and fabricating and tampering with evidence. Number 2. Christian White. In May 2023, staff members at a nursing home in Cooma, Australia, called emergency services when they decided they couldn't handle a 95-year-old resident who was holding a steak knife. Paramedics arrived on scene first and tried to de-escalate the situation by asking Claire Nowland to put the knife down. But the senior citizen, who suffered from dementia, refused to hand it over, and when police got there, she allegedly walked toward them with the blade outstretched in her hand. 33-year-old senior constable Christian White tasered Nowland, causing her to fall backwards and hit her head. She fractured her skull and died just 1 week later. According to staff at the facility, Nowland weighed less than 100 pounds and relied on a walker to move around. She approached the responding officer slowly, and a female officer at the scene reportedly told White that she thought she could grab the knife from Nowland's hand, but White apparently still felt it was necessary to launch his taser. After an investigation, he was charged with grievous bodily harm, assault occasioning bodily harm, and common assault. After Nowland passed away, New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb said it was possible that White's charges would be upgraded to manslaughter. She said she refused to watch the footage of the incident until she was handed the final investigative report. A manslaughter charge would be grossly inadequate, according to prosecutor Peter Levac, who called for White to be charged with murder. For now, White is suspended as he awaits the next steps in the case. It wasn't the first time White's actions have caused controversy. 3 years earlier, he and a colleague were criticized for their behavior during a traffic stop with a man named Alan Watts, who was suspected of being impaired by drugs. In body cam footage of the stop, White's partner could be heard threatening to break Watts' legs if he tried to run away. While allegations against the officers for their conduct were dismissed in the end, Police Commissioner Webb said that White's history will be taken into account as part of the current investigation into the nursing home incident. Number 1. Kenneth Memela. In September 2022, a 53-year-old police officer from Hudson Valley, New York, named Kenneth Memela was officially charged with 4th-degree stalking. According to state police, a series of complaints regarding incidents in the town of Middleton led to the arrest of Memela, who was a 9-year veteran of the nearby Montgomery Police Department. A criminal complaint said that he harassed a woman with the intent of causing physical or emotional harm. The final straw came when he was accused of approaching the victim outside a grocery store. Memela denied stalking the woman, who he claimed was an ex-girlfriend, trying to drag him through the mud after their relationship ended. Speaking with the Times-Herald Record, he admitted to simply crossing paths with the victim in a parking lot, but he insisted he was just there to shop and that the encounter was simply the result of bad timing. He said he approached the woman because he still had some of her belongings in his car and wanted to return them to her. According to Memela's version of events, she ignored him, got into her car and drove away. The criminal complaint tells a different version of events though. Based on video evidence of the incident, Memela was accused of waiting for at least 16 minutes before making contact with the woman in the parking lot. At the time of his arrest, he was already on leave thanks to an injury. His superiors decided that he would stay out of the job pending the outcome of the case. Memela told the Herald Record that he looked forward to proving his innocence and clearing his name one day. Thanks for watching. If you were being blackmailed by a corrupt cop, would you cooperate with their demands or report them, hoping that the authorities believed you? Or would you do something else, like move away and hope they left you alone? Let me know in the comments below.